Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. It is my great pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Amitabh Verma. Amitabh, for those of you that don't know, plays a very important role in the college in that he teaches the Foundation Graphic Studios. And while some people might say he's a little old school with his, reliance upon hand graphics, it's very important. It's a very important foundational skill that he teaches our first year students. And recently, he has been looking at how to apply the principles of graphic design to things outside of landscape architecture. So with that introduction, I will let him take it away. Thank you, Amitabh.
Thank you, Donnie. All right. So thank you, everyone, for being here. It's late in the day, and I know that everybody has a lot of other things to do. So I really appreciate you being here. What I'm going to talk about today is my research trajectory. And I know that obviously the colleagues here know, but for the students, I'd like to say that one of the big components of teaching at a university is the expectation that you have an active research agenda, because what we teach in the classroom relates to society and community as a whole. And so addressing those questions, the larger questions that affect us and our communities as part of research, is a big expectation that that exists for university professors. And I would like to give you a little bit of background about my journey, and in particular, a recent deviation that has taken place. So I titled this Thinking Outside the Field, and I have a couple of visual puns there. And initially, it comes from the idea of thinking outside the box, but then I thought, well, I'm really talking about going beyond your discipline, so I'll use the word field, which means both discipline, and in the context of landscape architecture, it has another meaning, field. So that's what's going on. So I'll start at the beginning. When I started working here, I came from practice, and so I didn't really have, I don't have a PhD, so I didn't have an established history of research, and I had to figure it out on my own when I came here, as in what can I do. And then the simplest thing was to study things that I knew about. And so because I got my architecture degree in India, and I was familiar with Indian cities and the issues they faced, I started writing about those subjects. And so on the very left was the first publication where I was looking at waterfronts and what they mean. And then from that, I expanded into looking at other patterns of development that exist. The second paper was about Mumbai, or Bombay as it was called, and how current practices don't necessarily take into account health of the residents. And there are issues of you can say, inequity between the wealthy and the poor, who are an integral part of the community, but don't necessarily have the rights or the powers to make decisions or to contribute to decisions or to be heard in a way that planning practices reflect their needs and their accommodations. And then the third paper was also about looking at the city and water relationship, but in the context of Athens, and how Athens has a river, but it's essentially invisible. And that's problematic in many different ways. It's tied to the history of the city, and so acknowledging the river and making it visible and a better part of everybody's life, it seems like an issue that needs to be addressed. And so I was taking what I started with and then applying it to a local context. These are just 3 papers out of many that I wrote. And then after a few years, I switched to writing about hand graphics, because the more I taught and the more computers came in, I could see that something very critical and foundational is being marginalized in our curriculum. And it's inevitable because the industry is reflecting those trends. But at the same time, for designers, and particularly for students, it has some serious implications. And so I wrote these The first two articles are, as you can see, I'm talking about why hand graphics continue to be relevant. And then the second was my specific approach to how I try to address that in my classes. Those were published in, those two are in the same journal called Visual Inquiry. And then the third one is in a journal called Drawing, Research, Theory, and Practice. And so the idea was, okay, I found something that was more urgent, that I felt we need to address more, because if something as basic as being able to draw your ideas becomes something that's rare or uncommon or challenging, then that raises some sort of existential questions about what being a designer is. And so for the past several years, I've been writing about this topic, and it seems a bit strange to be saying something that to me is so evident and apparent. And in the beginning, when I was submitting these abstracts, I didn't think they would even accept them because it's stating something so obvious, and yet they did. And so I felt pretty good in the sense that, okay, there is obviously an audience for this kind of stuff. Excuse me. So this is an ongoing process, and now I've sort of expanded from this into talking about drawing in mental health. And I just submitted a paper 2 weeks ago about my first-year Odyssey class, which is about using sketching and drawing as ways to reduce stress and anxiety. And the whole idea is to basically popularize drawing more and to not only promote it within the context of landscape architecture design, but let everyone know that everybody can draw, and there's so much benefit, and it doesn't require any special skills or training. And it used to be a universal skill that was taught in schools. It's part of the whole writing cursive and things like that. Things that were not specialized skills. They were part of everybody's education, but have somehow become seen, now they're being seen as something very unique or specialized or not relevant to everybody, and that's really not the case. So while I was writing this, in 2020, we had the pandemic, and I took an accidental tour. I should say my research agenda took an accidental tour. And what happened was, during the early days when we were all sitting at home and afraid to go out, and our lifestyles were so interrupted, I didn't have a lot to do. And so what I started doing was making some artwork, and I was just doing it for myself to keep busy. There was no real purpose there. And it was just a way to sort of keep occupied. And so I did that, and I created this artwork, and I posted it on my Instagram where it got noticed. And I didn't realize it then, but I was onto something. And I was reacting to the situation and the advisories that we were seeing purely as a visual designer and saying, well, it's been a long time that people have been are being told to be careful and to take precautions. The pandemic doesn't seem to be going away. And over time, what happens is people, they let their guard down. And it was too early, because as we know, it lasted for 3 years. And so what I was trying to do was say, how could we reframe this information and present it to people in a way that's different from what they just saw, so it sort of reinvigorates their interest. And I used several different themes. This was, again, kind of this historical thing. And when I did this, I have to say, I was really nervous that people might think that I was doing this because I thought this was creative. I was actually intentionally using the idea of kitsch to say something that has been so overused. The first two posters, I know you've seen them in so many different contexts. And I was kind of making fun of it, but then I thought, what if people think I really am thinking this is good design? So that kind of made me nervous. The fact that, I wanted people to know this is cheesy on purpose. It's not, I don't think this is real art. I'm actually making fun of it. And then from that, I was looking at some other concepts and say, how do we take this idea? And then these three images take the idea of absurdity and to take this idea of these antique paintings and to use them to say something that's valid today. And then I would see these images of the Vitruvian Man and say, oh, look, he's kind of defining a 6-foot circle, and so that can be used to say this. And I don't know if people necessarily got these things or not, but it was, the idea was to use visuals and graphics and color to at least make the advisories eye-catching. The second two are more graphic posters, and I will say the only element of creativity in this whole collection is the fact that I used the safe sex campaigns from before to say safe 6 because, it was 6 feet. That's the only element here that's at all creative or that I would feel okay taking credit for. So all of this happened, and like I said, I posted these to my Instagram, and people responded, and they said, oh, we think this is really good. And I was like, okay, surely you're making fun of me because this is not really good. But they seemed actually interested. And then I got an email from Georgia Magazine, which is the university's magazine. And it's, they kind of do an overview of what is happening in the university and what people are doing. And it's published 3 times a year. And it goes out to all the alumni. And they said, oh, we want to write about this. And I said, okay, I can't say no. But again, I'm a little bit nervous about people thinking that I think this is real art. And then that led to another magazine, local magazine, contacting me and saying, can we write about this? And I said, okay. And then that led to an invitation from the Special Collections Library saying, can we exhibit these posters? And at that point, I was questioning this. I was like, what? Is everyone just trolling you? Because this is not real art. But at that point, I thought, okay, this is kind of, maybe there's something here that I didn't even realize. And so what I did then was, it got me thinking to saying, okay, maybe people are seeing something that I'm not. And it could just be because when you're in a discipline, so many things become sort of intuitive or standard knowledge to you that you don't realize that maybe you are seeing things differently than other people who are not in your discipline. So what I did is I thought, okay, I'm going to try something. I'm going to submit an abstract to a journal, an academic journal. And if it gets in, then I think I will have some legitimacy. So I did. I submitted an abstract, and I said what I want to write about is humor and how humor can help enhance public attention to advisories. And I was very surprised when they accepted it, and they were like, sure. So I wrote an article about that. And the whole idea was to say, I was looking at what I had done as a case study to say, here's an alternate approach that was sort of not being really accounted for by the other more administrative organizations like the CDC and WHO. And in most situations, I think their approach is quite valid, but when there are times, there are extenuating circumstances like COVID was, when public attention starts to flag after a certain time, but you can't really relax because the crisis isn't over. You do have to take new approaches. And so I thought, okay, here's something that we can try. So they took that, and then I said, okay, I'm going to try again. So I tried for a different journal, and I wrote this article, and it's almost like an opinion piece. They called it an alternative gallery. And the article is about some artwork that I created, and the artwork is on another page. It's not on here. But in that, I was comparing medieval European representations of knights and dragons, where knights and saints were shown battling dragons, which represented existential threats of some kind. It could be the plague, or it could be all kinds of things. And I was reframing them in today's context and saying, for once we are facing something that threatens to destroy all humanity. And in some ways, this has parallels to what people at that time thought, the world is ending because there's this dragon here and whatever the dragon could represent. And so I saw these parallels, and so I reframed some artwork. And this article was talking about my approach. And I thought that was kind of frivolous too, but they took that too. So then I said, okay, I feel pretty good about this. You know, I have something, I'm not a fraud. And then I started sort of networking around the university and talking to people in the sciences and saying, I have this approach, would you be interested? And I was put in touch with Professor Yan Jin, who is in Grady, and we had several sessions where we were brainstorming, and she said, oh, you know, I have, this book is coming out, and I think this would be something that would fit very well in it. So we wrote a chapter together along with one of our other colleagues as a way to propose a new strategy for framing crisis information or crisis communication or crisis advisories when communicating with the public acquires a new dimension of urgency. And so this was, you know, when this was accepted, and then I said, okay, as it turns out, I didn't realize this now, but we do have a lot of interdisciplinary knowledge that other disciplines could benefit from. And I think that we don't necessarily aren't aware of that, or we don't really realize that, but that is certainly the case. So this led me to my current area now. And so for the past few months, I've sort of shifted my focus, and now I'm writing about how public messaging or communication can be enhanced through visual framework of information, so graphics and stuff like that. This is the title of a conference presentation. I was at a conference in September, and this was our presentation. And I have images of me giving the talk, but that wouldn't be very interesting. So instead, what I'm going to show you is photos of the city where the conference was, which is Ljubljana in Slovenia. An incredible place. And if you take nothing else away from this talk, make it a point to visit this city, because it is so exceptional. And you know, it's a spectacular city, but for me it was also additionally fantastic to be there, because it was my first time going to Eastern Europe, which is a part of the country, a part of the world, weirdly enough, that has an extraordinarily long history and its own culture and food and traditions and philosophy, and yet we know very little about it. You know, all of the focus is on the West. So going there was a real treat, because there was a sense of discovery that that you don't really find in other countries or cultures that you know better. So our Maymester program goes there to Croatia. And so if you ever get a chance, you should really go. And then these are some other images from there. While I was at the conference, I was attending a presentation, and this researcher who is from Belgium, she was talking about how companies have, after some kind of crisis, their strategies in reconnecting with people and providing assurance. And she gave, in her talk, she gave two examples. After 9/11, American Airlines had a whole campaign to connect with their customers by giving them buttons and other symbolic tokens. And Brussels Airport, because there was a bomb blast there, and several people died. And after that, they undertook this other campaign to sort of connect with people. And I became interested in knowing what those strategies were, again, as a visual designer. So I spoke to her afterwards, and she was looking at this as a scientist, and I said, do you have more information about what these strategies were? And she said, no. Turns out there's not a lot of information. So I said, would you like to collaborate? And she said, yes. So right now, what we are looking at is how, after a crisis, we're kind of focusing on the aviation industries, how airlines and airports, when something happens that requires them to connect with customers in a different way, how they can let people know that their priorities are different and the customer still is still valued. And they have to take a slightly different approach from the usual when you go through the airport, and the idea is on efficiency and comfort. But when something like this happens and people are frightened, then the airlines and the airports have to take on the job of reassuring people and saying, you can trust us, we are safe, and this is what we are doing. And the idea of them saying that, airlines and airports are not faceless organizations, but they're run by people who are just like the passengers. So that strategy, the goal then is different, and that requires different strategies. And so we are now looking at this article, and it's really a fun, exciting research project to say what have other companies done, what has worked, and in what way can they provide solace, let's say, or comfort, or inspire confidence in people who are afraid to fly. So this is something I had never foreseen myself doing, but it is related to what I do in a very different way, and it's very exciting because it's very different from what I've done before, and it opens up new opportunities for me to work on, but also I learn a lot by doing things that are out of my sphere. They're not familiar, and there's all these bodies of research that affect what we do or what I do, but I wasn't aware of. So there's as much learning as providing expertise, which makes the process a lot richer and more meaningful. So following that, what happened was Grady College has a crisis communication think tank, and they have several different categories. And so I was invited to join as a partner in the category of public health and disaster management. So that's something that's kind of an active program, then they're always doing things. So that's become a lot of fun. A few months ago, I was talking to Dr. Jin, and who is at Grady, and I said, what about taking what we do, our research, and putting it in the classroom? Is this something that could work? And so she got very excited about it. And so last year, her students came over to the crit space, and my students in spring last year, we put them together. So we combined her students with mine. Her students designed the messaging, and my students designed the visual framing. And what we did is we created public advisories for UGA, for student safety, and issues like scooter safety or not wearing headphones when you cross the street, that sort of thing, which is a real active part of what UGA wants students to know for their own safety and security. And whatever messaging there is so far is designed by UGA, but here the idea was if you're creating messaging targeted at students, then it would be beneficial to have them tell you or be a part of the process. So we tried this last year. It was a 3-hour session, and there were some people from UGA here, and it went really well. So we said, okay, this is fantastic. We're going to do it again. And so at the end of it, it was basically a charrette, which we are familiar with, but for the communication students, it was kind of a new experience, and they really kind of enjoyed it. And at the end of it, we had pinups, and then that was all the groups. So this year, we're doing it again. In fact, we had our first session on Monday. And in addition to the Grady students and students from landscape architecture, we also had Kurt Harris, who is the director of the Institute for Disaster Management at UGA, and then Greg Trevor, who is the spokesperson for UGA and also the director of crisis communications, I think. And they're really invested in this because they want to create advisories for students that involve them, that relate to them, and that speak to them in a way that existing strategies may not necessarily. So this promises to be a very exciting collaboration. Our idea is to take this forward and write about our experience and say, how do you translate this collaboration between two fields that you wouldn't necessarily put together, landscape architecture and communication. Although if you think about it, communication is a big key component of what landscape architects and all designers do. And then how a research collaboration can be translated into the classroom, and it has become a part of pedagogy. And so this year we're doing it as 2 sessions. So we had the first session Monday, and then in a couple of weeks, they'll be here for the actual brainstorming and creation. And then we're hoping to take the results of that, what we get, and kind of advertise them and promote them, and so and also to do this on a regular basis. So now, all of this is sort of, kind of my history, and I think that since you are here, I would like to give you something that is useful to you. And so, again, so there are two things that I think you should know. This is more towards landscape architecture students, but truly, all of the disciplines in our college share these values. And so the first thing I think is that the core skills, the core competencies that we have in our discipline are universally applicable. Now, when I say it, it sounds very obvious, but it's something that we tend to forget, that all of these skills are so universal, and our programs focus on them in a very intentional way, and in a manner that's different from some other disciplines. And so understanding that these are real assets that are not only applicable but also needed and valued. So as I figured out, a lot of what I took for granted is actually not that common and much appreciated when you offer it. And then the second thing is, sending emails or emailing people and saying, I have an idea, or this is what I think, can be a surprisingly effective way that can lead to lots of opportunities. And all of the stuff that I showed you, it came out of that, is just emailing people and saying, I have an idea. Sometimes they'll say no, but sometimes they might say yes. And it can lead to, so I've come, my current research has come quite far from landscape architecture, but yet it's related in a way that's very intrinsic to what I do. And creating those extensions is something that isn't just valued, but also very rewarding as a person, so for me. So what I would say is, these are two things that I think I would like all students to remember. And whenever you get a chance, now or later, understanding that you have these skills that are sort of exceptional in the way that, in the sense that they're not necessarily taught everywhere else, it's a real asset that you can capitalize on. And that'll do several things. I think it opens new doors for you, but also it helps people understand better who you are and what you do, which unfortunately happens to be a characteristics of a lot of the programs, I think, except planning. I think people know what planners do. But for the other majors, I think they could do with a little better PR. And I think something like this might help everyone else out there understand and appreciate what we do.